Between the 1950s and 1970s, its capital was called the Paris of the Middle East. The city featured elegant French architecture that blended with traditional Ottoman structures. It had a bustling nightlife and cafe culture, and it was celebrated for its religious diversity, artistic freedom, and an open press. But a 15-year civil war that began in 1975 and subsequent political and economic crises led to Beirut as Paris of the Middle East becoming a distant memory, while the state of Lebanon evolved socially and politically. Hi, you're listening to The Why in History. I am Ajay Kaul, and today we take a look at the state of Lebanon, its early days of independence, and the social, military, and political turmoil that led to it becoming a hub for the Hezbollah. Post-World War I, after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, the semi-autonomous region of Mount Lebanon came under the French mandate. And in 1920, the French added major coastal cities like Beirut, Tripoli, Sidon, Tyre, and the fertile Bekaa Valley to create the modern state of Lebanon. But this expansion led to a massive shift in the population balance, with the Maronite Christians, who were a clear majority, now sharing the majority status with Sunni and Shia Muslims. Now, it was actually the Maronite Christian leaders who approached the French to expand Mount Lebanon's area. They argued that Mount Lebanon needed port cities and a fertile agricultural area to be able to sustain itself economically. And that's why the French added the port cities of Beirut, Tripoli, etc., and the fertile Bekaa Valley to create the modern state of Lebanon. Now, this triad of Maronite Christians, Sunnis, and Shia Muslims created some tensions. So to overcome these, the French drafted the 1926 Lebanese constitution, which guaranteed that these majority religious sects would be proportionally represented in public office and parliament. Now, as World War II progressed and the French incurred some initial losses, the Lebanese found an opportunity to gain independence from France. But there wasn't any unity against the French. The Maronite Christians wanted to continue as a French protectorate because they were afraid of being marginalized and swallowed up by the Arab world. The Muslims, on the other hand, feared being permanently dominated by the Christian colonial powers and preferred merging with the neighboring Syria. So to resolve this impasse, two prominent leaders, the Maronite leader Bichara el-Khoury and Sunni leader Riyad el-Sol, came together in summer and fall of 1943 and concluded a gentleman's agreement which came to be known as the National Pact of 1943. Gentleman's agreement. What's that supposed to mean? Well, there was nothing in writing. The two leaders just agreed on some guidelines and promised to adhere to these. And the agreement was that both the Christians and the Muslims would give up their individual demands and align with an independent and unified Lebanon. Based on a 1932 census, the pact agreed on a strict 6-to-5 ratio favoring Christians over Muslims in parliamentary representation. And irony of ironies, Lebanon has not conducted any national level census since this 1932 census. And the most interesting aspect of this national pact was that it created the sectarian governance system that is used even today, which mandated that the president must always be a Maronite Christian, the prime minister a Sunni Muslim, and the speaker of parliament a Shia Muslim. So while the underlying constitution remained mostly unchanged from the 1926 constitution, the day-to-day operation of the post-independence government was dictated by this national pact. Subsequently, Lebanon achieved independence on November 22, 1943, and Bechara el-Khoury, the Maronite Christian, became its first president, and Riyad el-Sol, the Sunni Muslim, its first prime minister. Approximately 5 years later, in May of 1948, David Ben-Gurion announced the formation of the State of Israel, bordering Lebanon. At this time, Lebanon had an interesting choice before it. Being a Christian majority nation, should it align with the Jewish majority state in its neighborhood? Or should it align with the rest of the Arab world? Lebanon realized that it was a small nation and it could not survive if it antagonized the Arab world in its neighborhood. And right away, Lebanon was tested for its loyalty to the Arab world as 5 nations, Egypt, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon, joined forces to fight Israel in 1948. Israel was able to push back these forces, but this Arab-Israeli war proved disastrous for Lebanon. About 100,000 displaced Palestinians sought refuge in Lebanon. 100,000 Palestinians. This was close to 10% of the total Lebanese population. Most of these Palestinian refugees were Sunni Muslims. So the Christians within Lebanon were concerned that absorbing these would shift the delicate population balance between the Christians and Sunni Muslims in favor of the Sunni Muslims. So to prevent a permanent demographic change, the Lebanese state pursued a policy of non-integration. That is, the Palestinian refugees would be granted a restricted foreign status. So the refugees would never be citizens, which meant that they would never get the benefits of citizenship like property ownership, formal employment, etc. This policy created flames of dissent within this Palestinian refugee community, which ultimately laid the groundwork for these refugees in Lebanon becoming prime candidates for recruitment by the Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO. But between 1949 through the late 1960s, the border between Israel and Lebanon was very peaceful, and the Lebanese capital Beirut was conferred the title Paris of the Middle East. But all of this changed in 1967 after the 6-day Arab-Israeli War. Within 6 days, Israel defeated the armies of Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. This defeat radicalized Palestinians as they realized that they could not rely on Egypt, Syria, and Jordan to win back their land. And the most immediate consequence of this was that Fatah, the underground guerrilla faction of the PLO, led by Yasser Arafat, took formal control of the PLO in 1969. Okay, so how does that impact Lebanon? Well, Yasser Arafat at the helm of the PLO led to the Cairo Agreement of 1969. The 1969 Cairo Agreement explicitly allowed the PLO to use parts of Lebanese territory to organize and conduct armed operations against Israel. So essentially, the Palestinians were telling the Lebanese, we seek refuge in your country, but we would like to use it as a military base for our operations. Wait, and the Lebanese agreed? They had no choice. There was a lot of dissent brewing between the Lebanese Muslims who supported the Palestinian cause and the Lebanese Christians who fiercely opposed it. So there was a fear that continuing to fight the PLO would lead to a civil war within Lebanon. And there was also intense pressure from the neighboring Arab nations, led by Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser, for Lebanon to support the Palestinian armed struggle. So essentially, Lebanon had to surrender a piece of its own sovereignty. Interestingly, in 1970, the Lebanese got a preview of the consequences of the Cairo Agreement. By 1970, the Palestinian Fedayeen groups in Jordan had built autonomous zones in refugee camps, ignored local laws, and carried out independent attacks against Israel that drew heavy retaliatory strikes on Jordanian territory. And that was not it. In September of 1970, 3 international airliners were hijacked and blown up in Jordan's Dawson's Field. Jordan was not having any of this. And on September 17, 1970, the Jordanian army launched a massive offensive, shelling Palestinian refugee camps and militant positions. And this operation continued all the way to July 1971, when the Jordanian military completely routed and expelled the PLO leadership and its fighters. Expelled? Where did they go? No prizes for guessing. Lebanon. This September 1970 operation by the Jordanian army came to be known as Black September, and it led to the emergence of an even more radicalized group under Fatah known as Black September. And this was the group responsible for the 1972 Munich Olympics massacre. Lebanon, though, between 1950 and 1970 had witnessed a golden age on the economic and social front. The Lebanese economy followed a free market model, and this led to the rise of Beirut as a regional financial and banking hub. During this time, a lot of the neighboring Arab nations nationalized industries, imposed socialist controls, and that drove a lot of capital, talent, and corporations to relocate to Beirut. And it was during this time that Beirut was branded Paris of the Middle East. But in July of 1971, all this changed drastically as PLO relocated its headquarters to West Beirut. And the military outposts, regional command bases, and launch sites were set up in South Lebanon, close to the Israeli border. The Israeli-Lebanese border, which had been relatively calm since 1949, suddenly became an active battlefield. The Israeli retaliatory strikes, which had been previously targeted at Jordan, were now targeted at South Lebanon, sometimes going deeper into Lebanese territory. In April of 1973, Israeli commandos landed on the coast of Lebanon in Zodiac speedboats with the intent of assassinating prominent PLO and Black September group leaders. Essentially, the Palestinian leadership that was involved in the 1972 Munich massacre. The Israelis were able to take out their targets, and it became clear that Israel would not hesitate to make incursions deep into Lebanese territory to take out Palestinian militants. With all this turmoil, Lebanese society itself was fracturing. The Christians were concerned about the growing power of PLO and its impact on their day-to-day lives. The Shias and the Sunnis, on the other hand, were very supportive of the Palestinian cause. And coupled with a lot of economic disparity between various regions of Lebanon and the various sects, Lebanese society broke into a massive civil war in 1975. A civil war that would last 15 years till 1990. And one of the early casualties of the civil war was what was once the Paris of the Middle East, Beirut. As the civil war broke out, both warring factions established their respective strongholds to fight each other. The Muslim factions, both Sunni and Shia, alongside the PLO leadership, established their base in West Beirut, whereas the Lebanese front, which was primarily dominated by the Christian political parties and militias, established its stronghold in East Beirut. And the line separating the two came to be known as the Green Line, primarily because of the wild vegetation and trees that grew in that abandoned area. Now, while the civil war was raging in Lebanon, two very important but correlated events happened. In June of 1982, Israel launched Operation Peace for Galilee, an invasion of southern Lebanon, with the aim to push the PLO fighters away from the northern Israeli border. Israel's initial justification for the incursion was that it was trying to create an approximately 25-mile buffer zone near Israel's northern border. By mid-June 1982, the Israeli forces had penetrated fairly deep into Lebanese territory and surrounded West Beirut. The international community had to intervene, and Yasser Arafat and PLO fighters were evacuated from West Beirut. Now, during the course of the Lebanese Civil War, Lebanese Army Major Saad Haddad broke away from the Central Command to organize local Christian and Shia soldiers into a breakaway unit to prevent the PLO militia from taking over Lebanon's border towns. This faction was called the Free Lebanon Army, which later became the South Lebanon Army. Now, why is all this important? Because in June 1982, when Israel invaded Lebanon, they found a ready ally in the South Lebanon Army. The result? Israel heavily funded, equipped, trained, and utilized the South Lebanon Army as a proxy militia in South Lebanon. The South Lebanon Army would continue to operate in South Lebanon as Israel's proxy for 18 more years till the year 2000, when Israel withdrew all its forces from South Lebanon. Wait, so Israel occupied South Lebanon for 18 years? Well, sort of. Bowing to international pressure, Israel had to formally withdraw in 1985. But it continued to maintain a presence in approximately 10% of Lebanese territory close to the Israeli border. And in collaboration with the South Lebanon Army, Israel was able to run a parallel government in that region. And this included a network of outposts equipped with radar and long-range artillery, restriction of movement into and out of the zone through highly secure checkpoints, and a detention center to jail and interrogate any suspected resistance sympathizers. So why did Israel leave in the year 2000? Well, that brings us to the second event that happened during the Lebanese Civil War: the rise of Hezbollah. When you forcibly occupy a region, there is going to be resistance. And after Israel's 1982 occupation of southern Lebanon, local Lebanese Shia groups and militias united under a new ideological leadership to form Hezbollah. Their primary aim was to fight the occupation of southern Lebanon by the Israeli forces. By this time, the Ayatollahs had come to power in Iran, and the newly formed Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, evinced interest in the Shia militia fighting Israel in Lebanon. The IRGC personnel traveled via Syria into Lebanon and started the process of training and structuring these local fighters into the cohesive force that Hezbollah would finally become. Now, Iran had two primary objectives with respect to training and funding Hezbollah. The first was that it was trying to export its cultural revolution to other parts of the Middle East. So the Shia uprising in southern Lebanon was the right place to start. The second, which came in later, was that Hezbollah could be used as a local proxy to deter Israel from launching any attacks on Iranian territory. So in the year 2000, as Hezbollah started becoming more and more potent, Israel found the partial occupation and partnership with the South Lebanon Army difficult to sustain. And newly elected Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak had to fulfill a campaign promise to end this highly unpopular occupation of southern Lebanon. And as the Israeli forces withdrew, the South Lebanon Army collapsed, and the Hezbollah advanced rapidly to fill that vacuum. The new de facto power center in South Lebanon was now the Hezbollah. While Israel had been very active in southern Lebanon during the civil war, Syria had been very active in the rest of Lebanon during the civil war. By late 1988, Lebanon's parliament failed to elect a new president. So the outgoing president, Amin Gemayel, appointed General Michel Aoun, head of the Lebanese army, as interim prime minister. The Muslim and pro-Syrian factions rejected this, and they recognized Salim al-Hos as the rightful prime minister. As a result, Lebanon was left with no president and two rival governments, General Aoun ruling from East Beirut and Salim al-Hos from West Beirut. In late 1989, the TAF agreement was brokered in Saudi Arabia to end the civil war. General Aoun fiercely rejected this accord because it failed to outline a concrete timeline for Syrian withdrawal. Wait, if General Aoun rejected this accord, who signed it? It was signed by the surviving members of Lebanon's 1972 parliament, which was the country's last legally elected legislative body prior to the outbreak of the civil war. So what were the key elements of the TAF agreement? The first was with respect to power sharing in politics. The 6-to-5 ratio between Christians and Muslims was changed to an equal 50-50 split. 64 seats for Christians and 64 seats for Muslims. Executive power was stripped from the Christian president and transferred entirely to the Council of Ministers, which is led by a Sunni Muslim prime minister. With respect to disarmament, all Lebanese and non-Lebanese militias were ordered to dissolve and hand over their weapons to the Lebanese state within 6 months of the ratification. But one exception was made: Hezbollah. While all civil war militias disbanded under this rule, Hezbollah was permitted to keep its weapons. Whoa, why? Well, there was a separate clause in the agreement which committed the Lebanese state to take all necessary steps to liberate all Lebanese territories from Israeli occupation. And Syria exploited this loophole by stating that Hezbollah was actually a resistance movement against the Israelis. And Syria was able to do this because it had received the green light from the United States to oversee post-war Lebanon in exchange for its support during the 1990 Gulf War. Keeping Hezbollah armed allowed Syria to continue to exert military pressure on Israel without triggering a direct state-to-state war. The 15-year Lebanese civil war finally came to an end in October 1990 when Syrian jets and ground troops stormed General Aoun's headquarters and forced him into a 15-year exile in France. The Syrian forces stayed in Lebanon for 15 more years, and they finally withdrew, bowing to internal and international pressure on April 26, 2005. The 15-year civil war left Lebanon in a state of complete ruin, with major cities like Beirut completely leveled. There was a massive brain drain as 800,000 highly educated professionals fled the country, and the economy was left a small fraction of its pre-war size. Before we end this segment of the program, I want to leave the listeners with a question to ponder upon. Did Lebanon commit a massive blunder by allowing the 100,000 Palestinian refugees in 1948? Or was its blunder not assimilating these refugees into Lebanese society? And on that note, we end this segment of the program. On to the quiz section. Question from the previous episode. Which Pakistan captain is often considered the pioneer of match fixing? Whistleblowers and several historical accounts allege that betting and syndication in international cricket matches surfaced during the 1979-80 India-Pakistan series when Asif Iqbal captained Pakistan. So the answer is B, Asif Iqbal. Question for the current episode. Where did the PLO move its headquarters to after being driven out of Beirut, Lebanon in 1982? Was it A, Tehran, Iran, B, Damascus, Syria, C, Tunis, Tunisia, or D, Cairo, Egypt? Once again, where did the PLO move its headquarters to after being driven out of Beirut, Lebanon in 1982? Is it A, Tehran, Iran, B, Damascus, Syria, C, Tunis, Tunisia, or D, Cairo, Egypt? The answer will be provided in the next episode. And with that, we conclude today's episode. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed every bit of it and will tune in again in 2 weeks for another interesting and exciting episode on world history. Till then, stay safe and keep exploring the why in history.